Undecided, an in-depth examination of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, a comparison of their lives, policies, and visions for America's future. Introduction. The 2024 election presents a pivotal moment in American history, offering two candidates with starkly different visions for the country. For many voters, the choice between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump represents more than just a decision about party lines. It reflects competing priorities, values, and approaches to governance. In a time of deep political division, understanding the policies, personal backgrounds, successes, and controversies of each candidate is critical for making an informed choice. This audiobook is designed for undecided voters, those who may feel torn between the familiar and the new, or who seek clarity on the impacts each candidate will have on the future of the nation. It offers a comprehensive, nonpartisan exploration of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, delving into their personal histories, political careers, and the policies they propose to bring to the White House. By providing a thorough and factual analysis, this book aims to give voters the information they need to make a decision that aligns with their values and aspirations for the country. What to expect? In this audiobook, we will take you through a chapter-by-chapter breakdown of both candidates, covering family and early life. Where did they come from? How did their upbringing shape who they are today? Political careers. What policies have they supported? What did they accomplish while in office? Successes and failures. What are their most notable achievements? What challenges or controversies have they faced? Policies for the future. How do their platforms address issues like the economy, healthcare, social justice, and foreign policy? What will they prioritize if elected? Impact on the middle class. How will their proposals affect middle-class Americans, the backbone of the nation's economy? The purpose. At the heart of this exploration is the undecided voter. We recognize that many voters feel unsure about which path forward is best for the nation. This book is not intended to persuade, but to inform. The goal is to present the facts about both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, allowing voters to weigh their leadership styles, records, and proposed policies. The 2024 election will have far-reaching consequences, shaping not only the political landscape, but the economic and social fabric of the United States for years to come. Whether you are considering Kamala Harris's vision for reforming healthcare and addressing racial injustice, or Donald Trump's focus on economic growth and national security, this audiobook aims to provide you with the insights needed to make a choice that resonates with your personal and political beliefs. Let's begin the journey by exploring the personal and professional lives of both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, starting with their family backgrounds and early influences. By understanding where they come from, we can better grasp where they intend to take the nation. Donald Trump was born on June 14, 1946, in Queens, New York. He is the fourth of 5 children. His mother, Mary Ann MacLeod Trump, was born in 1912 on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland. She immigrated to the United States in 1930 at the age of 18, searching for better opportunities during a time when economic hardship in Scotland pushed many to leave. She worked as a domestic servant for wealthy families in New York City before marrying Fred Trump in 1936. Mary Ann's immigrant background and working-class roots are a key, though often understated, part of Donald Trump's heritage. Despite her immigrant status, Mary Ann's influence in Donald's public narrative has been relatively minimal, especially when compared to the significant focus on his father's business empire. Trump has rarely spoken about his mother's immigrant experience, a contrast to the hardline immigration policies he championed during his political career. Mary Ann maintained her Scottish identity throughout her life, frequently visiting her home country. Although she lived a life of privilege as the wife of a wealthy real estate developer, her background as an immigrant provided Donald with a family history of someone who came to the U.S. seeking opportunity, something he has not typically highlighted in his political rhetoric. Fred Trump, Donald's father, was a significant figure in his life, both personally and professionally. Born in the Bronx in 1905 to German immigrants, Fred built a real estate empire primarily focused on middle-income housing developments in Brooklyn and Queens. His approach to business was marked by discipline, hard work, and an ability to capitalize on government programs during the New Deal era to expand his real estate ventures. While Fred Trump was a successful businessman, his dealings were not without controversy. His company faced accusations of discriminatory practices, particularly against African Americans. The U.S. Department of Justice filed a civil rights case against him in 1973 for refusing to rent to black tenants, a case that was settled without an admission of guilt, but left a lasting stain on the company's reputation. Fred's influence on Donald was profound, shaping his son's views on business and success. Donald learned the importance of building wealth, leveraging financial opportunities, and projecting strength from his father. Fred instilled in him a competitive spirit and a desire for prominence, values that Donald carried with him throughout his career in business and politics. However, Fred's legacy in real estate was also shaped by practices that are now viewed as ethically questionable, including discriminatory housing policies and aggressive financial strategies. These methods helped lay the foundation for Donald Trump's rise in real estate, but have also been points of criticism. Although Fred Trump himself did not run for office or hold a political position, he reportedly supported conservative and Republican causes, and this influence on Donald Trump's early views may have shaped Donald's later political leanings. Fred's success as a businessman and his connections in the real estate world helped create an environment where Donald Trump could leverage both business and political relationships in his later ventures, including his presidential campaign. Kamala Devi Harris was born on October 20, 1964, in Oakland, California. Her parents, Shamala Gopalan Harris and Donald Harris, played pivotal roles in shaping her worldview. Shamala, a breast cancer researcher and immigrant from India, came to the United States in the 1960s to pursue higher education at the University of California, Berkeley. It was during this time that she became actively involved in the civil rights movement, a critical influence on Kamala's upbringing. Donald Harris, originally from Jamaica, is a distinguished professor of economics, known for his work on economic development. His research was especially focused on the economies of developing countries. Shamala came from a family of Tamil Indian intellectuals. Her dedication to social justice began to solidify during her time at Berkeley, where she participated in protests and campaigns related to racial equality, civil rights, and women's rights. Her involvement wasn't radical, but it was deeply progressive, as she fought for equality alongside other scholars and activists. Her work as a breast cancer researcher was equally important, but it was her commitment to social issues and her pursuit of education as a tool for empowerment that made a lasting impact on Kamala. Shamala also instilled in her daughters a strong sense of pride in their mixed Black and Indian heritage, further connecting race, gender, and justice in Kamala's worldview. Kamala's father, Donald Harris, contributed another layer of complexity to her upbringing. As a prominent economist, his research often explored issues of inequality, anti-colonialism, and economic independence in developing countries like his native Jamaica. He, too, was drawn to progressive causes, particularly those examining the legacies of colonialism and the path towards social and economic justice for oppressed peoples. Together, Kamala's parents, while not considered extreme activists, were progressive thinkers who were deeply invested in dismantling structural inequality. The family lived in Berkeley, California, where Kamala was exposed to activism from an early age, often accompanying her parents to civil rights protests. After her parents divorced when she was 7 years old, Kamala and her younger sister, Maya Harris, were primarily raised by their mother. Shamala emphasized the importance of education and cultural pride, fostering in her daughters a strong sense of their diverse heritage. Kamala attended Howard University, a historically Black college in Washington, D.C., where she majored in political science and economics. Howard, often referred to as the Mecca for Black intellectuals, was instrumental in shaping Kamala's views on race, social justice, and public service. After completing her undergraduate studies, she pursued a law degree at the University of California, Hastings College of the Law. The values of justice, equality, and activism that Kamala's parents instilled in her laid the foundation for a career dedicated to public service and advocacy. Growing up with a strong sense of responsibility toward addressing racial and social inequalities, Kamala's path was shaped by her parents' deep involvement in the fight for justice. These early influences informed her focus on key issues, such as criminal justice reform, civil rights, and economic fairness, principles that have guided her throughout her career in law and politics. In summary, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump come from distinctly different backgrounds, both of which influenced their later careers and approaches to politics. Harris's upbringing was rooted in civil rights activism and social justice, with her parents' involvement in these movements shaping her understanding of racial equality and inclusion. Her early experiences as the daughter of immigrants played a key role in forming her values and guiding her into a career in public service. Trump, in contrast, grew up in a wealthy family, where his father's success in real estate provided a platform for his future business endeavors. Raised in a disciplined household and exposed early to the real estate industry, Trump benefited from both the resources and mentorship of his father, Fred Trump. His upbringing gave him an understanding of the business world, which would later influence his approach to leadership, focusing on economic growth and deal-making. His path from business to politics reflects a focus on using business acumen and negotiation strategies to drive his policy priorities. Donald Trump's career is often highlighted by his success in real estate and his ability to brand and market his name globally. However, it is also marked by financial setbacks, controversies, and a strategic use of media to build his personal and business empire. Trump's entry into the world of real estate began in the 1970s when he took control of the Trump Organization, originally founded by his father, Fred Trump. Fred had developed a highly lucrative business focusing on middle-income housing in Brooklyn and Queens, New York, leveraging government subsidies to grow his holdings. When Donald took the reins, he sought to differentiate himself by rebranding the business and moving away from the middle-income housing projects his father had excelled at. Instead, he saw an opportunity to enter the high-stakes world of luxury real estate in Manhattan, a shift that reflected his ambition to elevate both the company's profile and his own. One of Donald Trump's first major undertakings was the construction of Trump Tower in 1983, a luxury high-rise in the heart of Manhattan. The tower quickly became synonymous with opulence and the Trump brand. This project set the tone for Trump's future endeavors, where luxury and visibility were key. While his father provided him with a significant financial foundation, estimates suggest Fred Trump transferred hundreds of millions of dollars to Donald over his lifetime. Donald successfully leveraged this wealth to expand into more high-profile projects, including luxury hotels, casinos, and golf resorts both in the U.S. and internationally. However, not all of Trump's ventures were successful. The casino developments in Atlantic City, including the Trump Taj Mahal, experienced severe financial difficulties, leading to multiple bankruptcies for his companies. Trump's understanding of the power of branding was a major factor in his business success. Recognizing that his name alone carried value, he transformed Trump into a symbol of wealth, luxury, and success. He licensed the Trump name to real estate projects, hotels, and products, including Trump Steaks, Trump Vodka, and Trump University. This strategy allowed him to collect licensing fees without directly investing in many of the projects that bore his name, minimizing financial risks while capitalizing on the strength of his brand. However, not all of his ventures were free from controversy. Trump University, a program marketed as a way to learn Trump's real estate strategies, became embroiled in lawsuits due to claims of misleading marketing and unmet promises. The students alleged that the program failed to deliver on its pledges of personal mentorship and valuable education, leading to a $25 million settlement in 2016. Despite this controversy, Trump maintained that many participants benefited from the program, and he remained steadfast in defending its value. Trump's media persona reached new heights with the debut of The Apprentice in 2004, a reality TV show in which contestants competed for a position within Trump's organization. The show's success elevated Trump's profile significantly, showcasing him as a powerful CEO who made decisive, sometimes tough, business decisions. His famous catchphrase, "You're fired," became a cultural hallmark, cementing his image as a commanding, successful leader. The overwhelming success of The Apprentice played a critical role in expanding Trump's name recognition, paving the way for his eventual entry into politics. The show amplified his media presence and helped him control his narrative, presenting himself as a self-made billionaire and savvy businessman, despite his early inheritance. This image became a cornerstone of his political identity as he launched his 2016 presidential campaign, leveraging his business achievements and outsider status to appeal to voters frustrated with Washington's political establishment. Trump's mastery of media and public engagement became central to his political ascent. By crafting a narrative that highlighted his business acumen and outsider appeal, he gained the loyalty of a broad base of supporters. His ability to maintain control over his public persona played a significant role in his capturing of the Republican nomination and, ultimately, the presidency. Kamala Harris's career, in contrast, is marked by a steady rise through the legal and political systems, with a focus on criminal justice reform and consumer protection. Harris's early career as District Attorney of San Francisco, 2004-2011, brought significant reforms to the criminal justice system. Her Back on Track program, one of her key achievements, provided nonviolent first-time drug offenders with job training, education, and support for reintegration into society, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. While she was often described as a progressive prosecutor, her policies also faced criticism from those who felt she did not push hard enough on certain reforms, particularly in the areas of policing and sentencing. Her tenure as California's Attorney General, 2011 to 2017, further built her reputation as a tough prosecutor. She championed consumer protection, securing a $25 billion mortgage settlement for homeowners impacted by the foreclosure crisis, an achievement seen as one of her most significant. She also took on corporate fraud, winning a $1.1 billion judgment against Corinthian Colleges, a for-profit institution accused of misleading students about job prospects. These actions reinforced her public image as a defender of consumers and a leader unafraid to take on powerful institutions. However, Harris's approach to criminal justice issues became a point of contention. She faced criticism for not being more aggressive in prosecuting police officers involved in shootings or misconduct. At a time when the Black Lives Matter movement was gaining prominence, Harris resisted calls to allow her office to investigate all police shootings, arguing that local district attorneys were better suited for these cases. This decision frustrated activists seeking broader reforms in law enforcement, leading some to question her commitment to holding police accountable. Harris's stance on California's three strikes law also drew criticism. While she supported some reforms and implemented programs to reduce recidivism, her defense of this law and her opposition to early efforts to reduce mandatory minimum sentences led critics to argue that her policies contributed to mass incarceration, particularly within communities of color. Despite these criticisms, Harris maintained that her broader focus on rehabilitating nonviolent offenders demonstrated her commitment to evolving the justice system while balancing public safety. Harris's rise to national politics continued with her election to the U.S. Senate in 2016, where she became known for her work on criminal justice reform. She co-sponsored the First Step Act, aimed at reducing mandatory minimum sentences and expanding early release programs for nonviolent offenders. Harris was also a staunch advocate for healthcare reform and women's rights, pushing legislation to address maternal mortality and expand reproductive healthcare access. Her role in high-profile Senate hearings, particularly her tough questioning of figures like Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, elevated her national profile and made her a favorite among progressive voters. Her assertiveness and legal acumen positioned her as a leading voice on issues of justice and civil rights. In 2020, Harris made history as the first female, Black, and South Asian Vice President of the United States, marking a significant milestone in the nation's political history. Her election was celebrated as a powerful moment for diversity and inclusion, offering inspiration to women and communities of color. Harris's rise to the vice presidency underscored her commitment to public service and her ability to break barriers in American politics. As vice president, Harris has been tasked with overseeing several pressing national issues, including voting rights, immigration reform, and economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. These are complex challenges that require deft political maneuvering in a deeply divided political climate. Harris has worked to drive meaningful change, though not without facing significant obstacles. One of her key areas of focus has been voting rights, particularly in response to restrictive voting laws passed in several states. Harris has championed federal legislation aimed at protecting access to the ballot, such as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. However, the failure to pass comprehensive voting rights reform due to Senate gridlock has led some to question her effectiveness in advancing this critical issue. On immigration, Harris has focused on addressing the root causes of migration from Central America. She has led diplomatic efforts to improve economic conditions and reduce violence in countries such as Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Her long-term approach seeks to prevent migration crises by improving conditions in migrants' home countries. Though she has faced criticism for not addressing more immediate challenges at the U.S.-Mexico border, Harris's role in the nation's economic recovery has involved shaping policies to help small businesses and promote job creation. Her focus on ensuring that marginalized communities are not left behind has been central to her work, though rising inflation and broader economic challenges have overshadowed some of her successes. As Vice President, Kamala Harris has made a historic impact as the first female, Black, and South Asian to hold the position, inspiring many. She has played a key role in tackling major issues like voting rights, immigration reform, and the COVID-19 response, helping to oversee vaccine distribution and advocating for equitable health care. Harris has championed the bipartisan infrastructure law, worked for women's rights, and represented the U.S. in diplomatic missions, addressing global issues like climate change. She remains a strong advocate for racial justice, equity, and reform, bringing leadership and diversity to the role. Her historic election, combined with her efforts to tackle deeply rooted issues like voting rights, immigration, and economic equity, positions her as a trailblazer in American politics. Kamala Harris's political career began in law enforcement, rising to prominence as a prosecutor before entering national politics. In 2004, she was elected District Attorney of San Francisco, where she focused on reducing recidivism, defined as reoffending, and created the Back on Track program, an initiative aimed at giving first-time nonviolent offenders an alternative to incarceration. This program became a model for similar efforts across the country, designed to reduce reoffending by providing participants with job training, education, and life skills. Her political ascent continued in 2010 when she was elected California's Attorney General, becoming the first woman and person of color to hold the position. As Attorney General, Harris focused on consumer protection, which encompassed securing the $25 billion mortgage settlement for homeowners during the foreclosure crisis, which remains one of her hallmark achievements. She also worked to combat fraud, particularly in the for-profit education sector, winning a $1.1 billion judgment against Corinthian colleges. Harris's time as Attorney General, however, was not without controversy, as her record on criminal justice reform, particularly in dealing with police misconduct and harsh sentencing laws, has been a point of contention. In 2016, Harris was elected to the U.S. Senate, representing California. Her time in the Senate has been marked by her focus on issues like health care, criminal justice reform, and women's rights. As a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Harris gained national attention for her tough questioning during hearings, particularly during the confirmation processes of Trump appointees like Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Harris co-sponsored key legislation, including the Justice in Policing Act, which sought to address police violence and racial injustice, and the Maternal Care Act, which aimed to reduce maternal mortality among Black women by providing resources for improved health care. Her presidential campaign in 2020 started strong but eventually lost momentum, leading her to withdraw from the race before the Democratic primaries. Despite this, Harris's strong showing in debates and her focus on issues of racial justice helped propel her into the national spotlight. When Joe Biden selected her as his running mate, Harris became the first Black and South Asian woman to be nominated for national office by a major political party. After their victory in 2020, Harris took office as vice president, focusing on issues like voting rights, economic recovery from the pandemic, and healthcare access. Donald Trump's entry into politics came after a long career in real estate, branding, and television. His decision to run for president in 2016 was unexpected for many, as he had no prior experience in elected office. However, his populist message of "Make America Great Again" focused on economic nationalism, deregulation, and immigration control, resonated with many voters, particularly in rural and working-class communities. Trump's 2016 campaign was notable for its unorthodox style, heavy use of social media, and ability to tap into voter frustration with the political establishment. Running on a platform of economic protectionism, Trump promised to bring jobs back to America, particularly in manufacturing, and to prioritize American workers through restrictive trade policies and stricter immigration enforcement. His victory against Hillary Clinton marked a significant shift in American politics, with his campaign turning out voters in key swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which had traditionally leaned Democratic. As president, Trump's legislative achievements include the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which significantly lowered the corporate tax rate and provided modest tax cuts to individuals. Proponents of the bill argued that it stimulated economic growth and encouraged corporate investment, while critics pointed out that the benefits largely went to the wealthy and corporations. Trump also prioritized deregulation, particularly in the environmental and financial sectors, and took a hard stance on immigration. His administration implemented the travel ban in early 2017, restricting entry into the U.S. from several predominantly Muslim countries, a move that sparked widespread protests and legal challenges. The construction of a border wall along the U.S.-Mexico border was another cornerstone of his immigration policy, though much of the funding for the wall was reallocated from other government sources after Congress refused to provide full funding. In terms of foreign policy, Trump focused on an America First approach, withdrawing the U.S. from several international agreements, including the Paris Climate Agreement and the Iran nuclear deal. His administration also renegotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, resulting in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. Trump's presidency was marked by significant controversy, including 2 impeachments. The first, in 2019, stemmed from accusations that he pressured Ukraine to investigate political rival Joe Biden. The second impeachment, following the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot, was for incitement of insurrection. Trump was acquitted by the Senate both times. Despite leaving office in 2021, Trump remains a dominant figure in the Republican Party, with his policies and influence continuing to shape its direction. In summary, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have both carved distinct paths in their political careers. Harris's background as a prosecutor and Attorney General of California laid the foundation for her focus on criminal justice reform and consumer protection. Her time in the Senate and as vice president has been marked by efforts to address racial and gender inequities, expand healthcare access, and protect voting rights. Trump, by contrast, leveraged his business success and outsider status to tap into populist sentiments during his 2016 presidential campaign. His presidency focused on economic deregulation, tax cuts, and a hardline stance on immigration. His America First policies, combined with his unconventional leadership style, reshaped U.S. politics, making him a central figure in the Republican Party even after leaving office. Immigration remains a central issue in the political arena, and both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have presented starkly different approaches to reforming the system. Their proposals for handling DACA and immigration at large reflect the broader contrasts in their political philosophies. Kamala Harris, during her time in the Senate and now as vice president, has consistently advocated for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a program initiated under the Obama administration. The program protects undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States as children, referred to as Dreamers, offering them protection from deportation and granting them work permits. Harris is a strong proponent of this program and has been vocal about her desire to not only maintain but also expand protections for Dreamers. She has co-sponsored the Dream and Promise Act, which aims to grant Dreamers permanent legal status, ultimately providing them with a pathway to citizenship. This plan reflects her broader approach to immigration, which is grounded in providing stability and fairness for those who contribute to American society. Harris emphasizes the moral and economic benefits of allowing Dreamers to stay, asserting that they are integral members of their communities. Many dreamers, she argues, are contributing to industries that are vital to the economy, such as healthcare, education, and business, while building lives and families of their own. For Harris, these protections are not just about ensuring legal stability, they are about fostering a society where hard-working individuals have the opportunity to thrive. The impact of maintaining and expanding DACA, as Harris envisions it, would be profound for middle-class families. The security provided by this policy would enable dreamers to more fully participate in the economy, opening doors for homeownership, entrepreneurship, and further career advancement. This integration could spur broader economic growth as more people enter the formal workforce, contribute to social security, and increase their consumer spending. Harris's vision is that by offering dreamers a secure future, they can better invest in themselves and their communities, benefiting society at large. Donald Trump, on the other hand, takes a starkly different approach. Throughout his presidency, Trump made it clear that he sought to end DACA. He viewed the program as an overreach of executive authority, arguing that the issue of immigration reform should be handled through Congress rather than executive action. Although the Supreme Court blocked his efforts to fully end DACA, Trump continued to pursue stricter immigration policies that focused on deportation and border enforcement. His broader immigration plan centered around reducing the number of undocumented individuals in the U.S., securing the southern border, and prioritizing American workers. Trump's stance on DACA is part of a broader philosophy that seeks to limit legal pathways for undocumented immigrants, focusing instead on deterring illegal immigration and deporting those who have already entered the country without documentation. His view is that programs like DACA incentivize illegal immigration by offering protections and benefits to those who have broken U.S. immigration laws. In this framework, stricter enforcement, including the deportation of dreamers, is necessary to preserve jobs for American citizens and reduce the strain on social services. The repeal of DACA, as proposed by Trump, would likely have widespread effects on both dreamers and the communities in which they live. Deporting hundreds of thousands of individuals who have been integrated into the workforce could create significant disruptions in industries that rely on their labor. Many dreamers work in sectors such as healthcare, where labor shortages are already a pressing issue. Moreover, families that rely on dreamers' incomes would face significant hardships, creating a ripple effect that could reach into the middle class, particularly in states with large immigrant populations. Critics of Trump's approach argue that mass deportations would not only break up families, but also deprive the economy of valuable contributors, potentially creating gaps in key industries and lowering overall productivity. On the surface, the contrast between the two candidates is stark. One offers a pathway to citizenship, while the other emphasizes enforcement and deportation. But both candidates frame their immigration policies around their broader visions for America's future. For Harris, expanding protections for dreamers and undocumented individuals is about ensuring that everyone has a fair chance to contribute and succeed, which she believes will strengthen the economy. For Trump, restricting immigration and enforcing deportations are about securing jobs for American citizens and reducing the burden on public resources. Reproductive rights. Donald Trump's views on reproductive rights have been central to his appeal to conservative voters. As president, Trump aligned closely with the pro-life movement, seeking to roll back federal support for abortion services and limit access to reproductive health care. A major accomplishment of his presidency was his appointment of 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court, a move that ultimately paved the way for the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the 2022 Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision. Trump frequently emphasized his commitment to protecting the unborn, positioning himself as a champion for conservative social values. Additionally, his administration's Title X restrictions, which prevented clinics receiving federal funds from referring patients for abortions, marked a significant policy shift, further restricting access to reproductive services. Kamala Harris, in stark contrast, has consistently supported a woman's right to choose and framed reproductive rights as a central element of healthcare equity. Harris co-sponsored the Women's Health Protection Act to codify Roe v. Wade into federal law and protect access to abortion services nationwide. She often speaks about the disproportionate impact that restrictions on abortion access have on low-income women and women of color, tying reproductive rights to broader issues of healthcare and social justice. Harris's policies reflect her belief that the government should ensure women have the right to make their own healthcare decisions, particularly in marginalized communities where access to care is already limited. In terms of equal pay and workplace rights, Trump's record has been mixed. While he has spoken in favor of equal pay for women, his administration rolled back an Obama-era rule that required companies to report gender pay data to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. His focus has largely been on deregulation and promoting business interests, with less emphasis on policies aimed at combating workplace harassment or addressing gender-based pay disparities. Trump's administration did not prioritize legislation related to workplace protections for women, and his personal history, marked by allegations of sexual misconduct, has made him a controversial figure in discussions around gender equity. Harris, on the other hand, has been a strong advocate for closing the gender pay gap. She supported the Paycheck Fairness Act, which aimed to provide greater transparency and accountability around pay discrepancies. Harris also introduced a plan to penalize companies that fail to demonstrate equal pay for men and women, a key component of her 2020 presidential campaign. In the wake of the Me Too movement, she has championed legislation to protect women from workplace harassment and discrimination, arguing that economic justice and workplace rights are essential for achieving true gender equality. When it comes to family leave, both candidates have expressed support, though with varying degrees of focus and scope. Trump signed the Federal Employee Paid Leave Act in 2019, which granted federal workers 12 weeks of paid parental leave. However, his administration did not pursue broader paid leave policies for the private sector. Harris, in contrast, has advocated for comprehensive family leave for all workers, supporting the Family Act, which would provide 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave across the workforce. Harris's vision extends beyond federal employees, aiming to expand access to paid leave for parents, caregivers, and those dealing with medical issues. Trump and Harris also differ significantly on their approaches to violence against women. As a prosecutor and attorney general, Harris built a career around advocating for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. She has worked to strengthen the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, focusing on providing protections and resources for survivors, particularly in communities of color and LGBTQ+ populations. Harris's legal background informs her intersectional approach, acknowledging how gender-based violence disproportionately impacts marginalized women. While Trump did support the reauthorization of VAWA during his presidency, his administration did not prioritize gender-based violence prevention. Personal allegations of sexual misconduct against Trump further complicated his stance on these issues, and critics have argued that his administration's policies and actions did not do enough to protect women from violence or harassment. In the realm of reproductive rights, workplace equality, and gender violence, Harris and Trump stand on opposite ends of the political spectrum. Harris advocates for progressive policies aimed at expanding rights and protections for women, particularly those from marginalized communities. Trump, with his pro-life stance and focus on conservative values, worked to reshape the legal and regulatory landscape to restrict abortion access and limit federal oversight in workplace and healthcare matters. Both candidates' policies have far-reaching implications for women's rights and economic participation, reflecting their broader visions for the future of American society. Education. When it comes to education and student loan forgiveness, Donald Trump's approach leans toward simplifying repayment structures while ending programs that target specific professions. During his presidency, Trump advocated for the elimination of Public Service Loan Forgiveness, PSLF, a program aimed at forgiving student loans for individuals working in sectors such as government, education, and nonprofits after 10 years of qualified payments. Trump argued that PSLF favored certain professions at the expense of others and proposed consolidating loan repayment plans into a single income-driven repayment plan. His plan would allow forgiveness after 15 years of payments, regardless of the borrower's profession. Critics of Trump's approach argue that eliminating PSLF could disincentivize people from entering public service jobs, such as teaching or healthcare, which traditionally offer lower salaries. Many middle-class families could face added financial strain if this program were removed, particularly those who pursued degrees with the understanding that loan forgiveness would be part of their financial future. On the other hand, Kamala Harris has consistently supported PSLF and proposed expanding it to include more public sector workers. Harris believes that PSLF helps alleviate the burden of student loan debt for individuals committed to public service, such as teachers, healthcare workers, and government employees. She also advocates for making the PSLF program easier to navigate, reducing bureaucratic hurdles that have prevented many borrowers from receiving the forgiveness they were promised. Harris's plan emphasizes that middle-class Americans who choose to work in the public sector, often in lower-paying roles, deserve this financial relief. This expansion would be especially beneficial to individuals from underfunded public sectors like education and healthcare, providing them with greater financial security and contributing to economic stability in their communities. Critics, however, argue that expanding PSLF without addressing underlying education costs does little to resolve the broader issue of student debt. In terms of K-12 education, Donald Trump has been a strong proponent of school choice, advocating for voucher programs and increased federal support for charter schools. Trump and his administration argued that allowing public funds to follow students to private or charter schools empowers parents, particularly those in underperforming districts, to choose the best educational options for their children. His supporters believe that competition among schools leads to better educational outcomes overall. However, critics warn that diverting public funds to private institutions undermines public schools, potentially deepening inequities in educational access for lower and middle-class students. Kamala Harris takes a different stance on this issue, opposing school vouchers and expressing skepticism about the expansion of charter schools. Harris argues that such programs take critical funding away from public schools, leaving low-income and middle-class students, particularly in already underfunded districts, at a disadvantage. Her focus is on investing in public education by increasing federal funding to underfunded schools and raising teacher salaries. Harris's approach aims to bolster the public education system as a whole, ensuring that every student, regardless of background or income level, has access to quality education. While her critics acknowledge the need for public school reform, they argue that limiting school choice could trap students in failing school systems with fewer opportunities for improvement. The contrast between Harris and Trump on education is a microcosm of their broader policy differences. Trump emphasizes market-driven solutions, arguing that competition can improve services, while Harris advocates for increased public investment, focusing on equity and strengthening existing systems. For the middle class, these choices represent different visions of how to address educational challenges in the U.S., with significant implications for both the accessibility and quality of education. Donald Trump's foreign policy is marked by a strong America First doctrine, which favors unilateral actions over multilateral agreements. Throughout his presidency, Trump sought to withdraw the U.S. from various international organizations and treaties, arguing that many of these deals were disadvantageous to American interests. For example, he pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement and the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA, insisting that these agreements undermined U.S. sovereignty. Instead of relying on multilateral frameworks, Trump prioritized bilateral negotiations, where he believed the U.S. could secure more favorable terms. Supporters of Trump's unilateral approach argue that it allowed the U.S. to act more decisively and protect its national interests without being bogged down by the agendas of other nations. By pursuing direct negotiations, Trump aimed to safeguard American jobs and industries, especially in areas like energy and defense, where he saw global agreements as restrictive. However, critics argue that this policy alienated U.S. allies and diminished America's standing on the world stage. They believe that by stepping away from global leadership roles, Trump weakened international cooperation in tackling global issues like climate change, pandemics, and security. Kamala Harris takes a very different stance, advocating for a return to multilateralism. She believes that the U.S. should rebuild its alliances and re-engage with international organizations like the United Nations, NATO, and the World Health Organization. Harris argues that global challenges, such as climate change, nuclear proliferation, and pandemics, cannot be addressed by any one country alone. Instead, she believes the U.S. must work with its allies to find collective solutions. Harris's commitment to multilateralism also extends to trade. She supports fair trade agreements that include strong labor and environmental protections, emphasizing global cooperation to benefit American workers while addressing climate change. Trump, on the other hand, focused more on protectionism, using tariffs to protect American industries and renegotiating deals like NAFTA into the USMCA to favor U.S. labor. On the issue of climate change, Harris sees it as one of the most pressing national security threats. She strongly advocates for the U.S. to take a leadership role in the global fight against climate change, calling for aggressive action to curb carbon emissions and transition to renewable energy. She co-sponsored the Green New Deal and believes that investing in green jobs will not only protect the planet, but also create new economic opportunities. For Harris, addressing climate change is also a matter of social justice. Low-income communities and communities of color are often the most affected by environmental degradation, and she believes climate policy should prioritize protecting these vulnerable populations. In contrast, Trump has consistently downplayed the threat of climate change, focusing instead on expanding fossil fuel production and rolling back environmental regulations. His administration withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, arguing that it was unfair to American workers and businesses. Trump's emphasis was on energy independence, promoting traditional energy sources like coal, oil, and natural gas. While his policies may have benefited these industries in the short term, they raised concerns about long-term environmental degradation and America's ability to compete in the global shift toward renewable energy. When it comes to human rights and immigration, Harris and Trump are also worlds apart. Harris places a strong emphasis on human rights, particularly for marginalized groups such as women, LGBTQ+ individuals, and refugees. She advocates for increasing the U.S. refugee cap and defending the rights of asylum seekers, believing that the U.S. has a moral obligation to provide humanitarian aid to countries in crisis, especially in Central America, to address the root causes of migration. Trump's immigration policy, by contrast, focused primarily on border security. His administration prioritized building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border and implemented the zero-tolerance policy, which led to the separation of families at the border. Trump viewed immigration through the lens of national security and economic protection, aiming to reduce both legal and illegal immigration. His supporters believed that these policies protected American jobs and strengthened national security, but critics argue that they led to humanitarian crises and violated international human rights standards. In terms of military and defense, Harris supports diplomatic solutions to global conflicts and prefers a restrained use of military force. While she backs a strong U.S. military, she believes diplomacy and multilateral cooperation should be the first options in conflict resolution. Trump, on the other hand, focused on increasing defense spending and maintaining U.S. military dominance. He advocated for reducing U.S. involvement in prolonged conflicts, such as in Afghanistan and Syria, but took a hardline approach against adversaries like Iran and North Korea. Trump's foreign policy emphasized military strength and national sovereignty, often avoiding multilateral interventions. For voters, the stark differences between Trump and Harris on multilateralism, diplomacy, and global leadership provide a clear contrast. Harris's vision of U.S. foreign policy is one of collaboration and collective action, where the U.S. works with global partners to address shared challenges. Trump's approach is more focused on prioritizing U.S. interests and reducing commitments to international organizations, favoring direct bilateral negotiations and unilateral actions when necessary. In the realm of climate policy, immigration, military, and human rights, their opposing views reflect broader ideological divides, one that seeks to reassert U.S. leadership in global cooperation, and another that prioritizes national sovereignty and economic protectionism. Healthcare. Donald Trump approached healthcare reform with the goal of repealing the Affordable Care Act, ACA, believing that it had led to increased premiums and decreased competition in the insurance market. He sought to replace it with a more free market system, advocating for increased competition among insurance companies and the use of short-term health plans. These plans came with lower premiums but often fewer benefits, making them attractive to healthier individuals who did not require extensive coverage. Trump's administration also promoted health savings accounts, HSAs, to allow individuals to set aside pre-tax dollars for medical expenses, providing more flexibility in healthcare spending. While these policies aimed to lower healthcare costs, critics argued that short-term plans did not cover pre-existing conditions and left middle-class families with chronic health needs more vulnerable. The push to repeal the ACA without a clear replacement raised concerns that millions of Americans, particularly those who benefited from Medicaid expansions under the ACA, would lose coverage. Supporters, however, viewed Trump's approach as a necessary step to reduce government intervention and lower costs through competition. Kamala Harris, by contrast, has made healthcare reform a cornerstone of her domestic policy agenda. She proposes expanding the ACA and introducing a modified version of Medicare for all, allowing Americans the option to keep their private insurance if they wish. Harris emphasizes reducing prescription drug costs by enabling Medicare to negotiate directly with pharmaceutical companies, a move aimed at lowering the financial burden on middle-class families struggling with medication costs. Harris also focuses on expanding Medicaid in states that have resisted ACA expansions and advocates for preventive care, which she believes will lead to better long-term health outcomes. While her supporters praise her push for universal coverage, critics of Medicare for All express concerns over the potential impact on taxes and whether such a system would lead to longer wait times or reduced access to specialized care. Education. Kamala Harris views education as a key pathway to economic mobility. Her plan to make community college tuition-free and double the Pell Grant program is aimed at alleviating the financial burden of higher education on low- and middle-income families. Harris also focuses on improving K-12 education, advocating for increased teacher pay, especially in underserved communities, believing that investing in education is investing in the future workforce. In her vision, more funding for public schools is critical to reducing inequality, which is why she opposes school vouchers and the expansion of charter schools. Critics of her position argue that her opposition to school choice limits opportunities for families in underperforming districts, while supporters maintain that strong public education systems should remain the priority. Donald Trump's approach to education emphasizes school choice, advocating for vouchers that would allow public funds to be used for private and charter school tuition. His administration believed that competition among schools would improve overall quality, particularly for students in low-income areas. Trump's agenda sought to reduce federal involvement in education, empowering states and local school boards to set policies tailored to their community's needs. While advocates of school choice argue that it gives parents more control over their children's education, critics caution that diverting funds away from public schools could exacerbate inequality, leaving underfunded public schools even more disadvantaged. Trump's supporters counter that increased competition will ultimately drive up standards for all schools. Infrastructure and jobs. Donald Trump's infrastructure plan focused on rebuilding traditional infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and airports, through public-private partnerships. His administration sought to cut bureaucratic red tape and environmental regulations, which he believed slowed down project development. Trump was a strong advocate for fossil fuel industries and promoted the expansion of oil and gas pipelines, arguing that energy independence was crucial for national security and job creation in these sectors. Critics of Trump's policies were concerned about the rollback of environmental protections and the long-term consequences for climate change. Supporters, however, saw his approach as a way to boost short-term job creation, particularly in traditional energy sectors like coal and oil, and reduce U.S. reliance on foreign energy sources. Kamala Harris, in contrast, places a strong emphasis on green infrastructure and renewable energy. Her plan calls for significant investments in clean energy sectors like wind, solar, and electric vehicle technology, positioning the U.S. as a leader in the global transition to sustainable energy. Harris sees infrastructure modernization as necessary for both economic recovery and the fight against climate change. Her vision includes creating millions of new jobs in the renewable energy sector, particularly in underserved communities. However, critics of her plan point out that the shift away from traditional energy industries could lead to job losses in sectors like coal and gas, which have been the backbone of many local economies. Supporters argue that investing in green technologies is essential for long-term economic sustainability and environmental protection. Taxes. Kamala Harris's tax plan focuses on reducing income inequality by raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans and large corporations. Her proposal includes expanding tax credits for low and middle-income families, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, and the Child Tax Credit. Harris aims to provide tax cuts for families earning less than $100,000 annually, offering direct financial relief to the middle class. In addition to increasing taxes on the wealthiest, Harris advocates for higher taxes on capital gains and closing loopholes that allow the ultra-wealthy to pay lower effective tax rates than middle-class families. Critics of her tax policies argue that raising taxes on corporations and capital gains could hinder investment and job creation, though supporters contend that these changes are necessary to fund critical public services, including healthcare and education. Donald Trump, on the other hand, views tax cuts as a cornerstone of his economic philosophy. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21% and provided individual tax cuts across various income brackets. Trump believes that lower taxes stimulate economic growth by encouraging businesses to invest, hire, and raise wages, with the benefits eventually trickling down to middle-class workers. Critics argue that the tax cuts disproportionately benefited the wealthy and large corporations, while adding to the federal deficit. Supporters, however, highlight that middle-class families saw modest tax relief and that the law created a more business-friendly environment, leading to economic growth during his presidency. Social safety nets. Donald Trump's approach to social safety nets centered around reducing government spending and promoting self-reliance. His administration implemented work requirements for welfare programs such as SNAP, food stamps, and sought to limit Medicaid expansion. Trump argued that by creating jobs through economic growth, fewer people would need to rely on social programs. Critics of these policies argue that they disproportionately hurt low-income and vulnerable populations, leaving them without adequate support during times of economic hardship. Trump's supporters, however, maintain that fostering self-reliance is key to reducing dependency on government assistance, and that work requirements are necessary to ensure that benefits go to those who truly need them. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, advocates for expanding social safety nets to support middle and low-income Americans. Her proposals include extending unemployment benefits, increasing federal funding for affordable housing, and expanding access to paid family leave. Harris views these programs as essential for lifting families out of poverty and reducing economic inequality. While her supporters argue that expanding social programs is crucial for providing economic security, critics express concern over the costs of such expansions and the potential for increasing dependency on government assistance. Harris counters that ensuring access to these benefits will help build a stronger middle class and reduce poverty in the long term. Judicial influence and social policy. During Donald Trump's presidency, one of his most significant impacts was his reshaping of the U.S. Supreme Court, with the appointment of 3 conservative justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. These appointments shifted the court in a more conservative direction, influencing key rulings on issues like reproductive rights, religious freedoms, and states' rights. Trump's judicial appointments reflect his broader belief in states' rights and limiting federal intervention in social issues, giving states more control over regulating matters such as voting laws and reproductive health care. Critics argue that this judicial legacy has restricted access to essential rights for certain groups, while supporters believe that it has upheld constitutional values and preserved individual freedoms. Kamala Harris, by contrast, advocates for strong federal protections in areas like reproductive rights, civil liberties, and social justice. She believes that the federal government has a responsibility to safeguard the rights of vulnerable populations and ensure equal protection under the law across all states. Harris supports judicial appointments that prioritize civil rights and social equity, and she has called for federal legislation to codify protections into law, preventing states from undermining basic rights. While critics of her approach argue that it risks overriding states' autonomy, supporters believe that federal oversight is essential to ensuring fairness and justice nationwide. Conclusion. Domestic policies comparison. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump offer contrasting visions for the future of healthcare, education, infrastructure, taxes, and social safety nets. Harris emphasizes expanding access to public services and reducing inequality through tax increases on the wealthy, while Trump's platform focuses on tax cuts, deregulation, and economic growth through free market principles. For voters, the choice between these two platforms will shape the direction of U.S. domestic policy for years to come. Harris offers a more progressive approach centered on government intervention and public investment, while Trump's policies emphasize economic freedom and reduced government involvement. Both candidates present starkly different ideas about how best to support the middle class and ensure long-term prosperity. In the realm of modern American politics, few figures have commanded as much attention as Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Both have experienced triumphs and failures that have shaped public perception in profound ways, and both have been the subject of intense scrutiny. Whether admired or criticized, their paths have led them to the forefront of the national stage, with public opinion about them as divided as the country they seek to lead. Trump's rise to the presidency in 2016 came largely from his ability to dominate the media landscape. He leveraged a combination of television fame, social media prowess, and a fiery brand of populism to capture the attention and loyalty of millions. For many Americans, his success as a businessman, with ventures ranging from real estate to entertainment, symbolized the American dream. His brash rhetoric, though often polarizing, spoke to those who felt disenfranchised by the political establishment. On the other hand, Kamala Harris's ascent is one of breaking barriers. As the first Black and South Asian woman to hold the office of vice president, her story resonates with many who see her as the embodiment of progress in a nation grappling with issues of race and gender. Harris's journey from California's Attorney General to the Senate and then to the vice presidency has been a testament to her ability to navigate the complexities of both the justice system and national politics. Yet, while both figures have enjoyed significant success, their paths have also been marred by controversies. Trump's tenure in office saw him face two impeachments, the first for allegedly leveraging U.S. aid to pressure Ukraine into investigating his political rival, Joe Biden, and the second following the January 6th Capitol riots, where he was accused of inciting insurrection. These events have become central to the narrative of Trump's presidency, fueling debates about his leadership and his respect for democratic norms. To his supporters, Trump remains a champion of the forgotten American, a leader willing to challenge both political elites and the media establishment. For his detractors, however, his actions during these crises represent a dangerous disregard for the rule of law. In contrast, Harris's time in office has been characterized by a quieter, more behind-the-scenes approach. While her role as vice president is historic, her public profile has at times been criticized for being too low, particularly on key issues like immigration and the economy. Tasked with addressing the root causes of migration from Central America, Harris faced significant challenges and, in the eyes of her critics, struggled to take decisive action. Her supporters, however, argue that Harris is playing a long game, focused on structural reform rather than immediate, high-visibility victories. Trump's use of social media, particularly Twitter, was central to his political strategy. He bypassed traditional media channels, speaking directly to his supporters and often using his platform to attack political opponents or refute media reports. This approach, though effective in energizing his base, also contributed to the perception of him as a divisive figure. His frequent use of inflammatory language on issues like race, immigration, and nationalism created a media firestorm, further polarizing the electorate. Harris, by contrast, has taken a more measured approach in her public engagements. She has focused on issues of healthcare equity, voting rights, and worker protections, often emphasizing her commitment to marginalized communities. However, her critics argue that this caution has led to a lack of bold, clear messaging, particularly on issues like economic recovery and inflation, leaving some voters questioning her leadership capabilities. Harris's historic role as vice president comes with immense expectations, and the challenge of living up to those expectations has been a recurring theme in her public life. While Trump's triumphs are often framed around his business acumen and his ability to capture the public's attention, Harris's achievements are viewed through the lens of breaking glass ceilings and advancing equity. Yet, both leaders have faced questions about their leadership styles. Trump's insistence on framing himself as a victim of political persecution, a narrative he continues to push in his 2024 campaign, has kept him in the spotlight, even as legal troubles mount. Harris, on the other hand, has been criticized for her lack of visibility during moments of crisis, with some questioning whether she has fully seized the mantle of leadership her role demands. Ultimately, the public perception of Trump and Harris is a reflection of the broader divides in American politics. Trump's brash, media-dominating style contrasts sharply with Harris's more reserved, behind-the-scenes approach. Both have faced significant controversies, yet their responses to these challenges, whether through defiant public speeches or quiet policy work, have shaped how they are viewed by the American public. As the country looks ahead to the 2024 election, these two figures, though very different in their styles and strategies, continue to play pivotal roles in shaping the nation's political landscape. The 2024 election stands as a defining moment in American history, with voters faced with a choice between two vastly different visions for the country's future. This book has aimed to present an in-depth and balanced comparison of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, helping undecided voters navigate the complexities of their policies, leadership styles, and the long-term consequences of their potential presidencies. Domestic policies and the middle class. Kamala Harris's platform is deeply rooted in the idea that government can and should be a force for good in addressing inequality and promoting economic justice. She emphasizes expanding social safety nets, improving healthcare access, and implementing progressive tax reforms to create more opportunities for the middle class. Her vision is one of collective responsibility, where government intervention helps lift up marginalized communities and ensures equal opportunities for all. Harris's focus on social programs and infrastructure investments, particularly in green energy, reflects her belief in the power of government to reduce inequality and create long-term economic sustainability. Yet this vision may feel overly ambitious to some, raising concerns about the impact on taxes and business growth, particularly among voters wary of increasing government intervention. While Harris seeks to empower the middle class, some fear that the balance of government expansion could come at a cost to individual liberties and free market dynamics. On the other side, Donald Trump's approach is framed by his belief in the free market and limited government intervention. His signature achievements, including the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, are lauded by supporters as fuel for economic growth, encouraging businesses to reinvest and create jobs. Trump's focus on deregulation and America First policies appeals to those who believe the best way to help the middle class is to reduce government burdens on businesses and allow economic growth to trickle down to all Americans. His emphasis on school choice and voucher programs speaks to his conviction that competition, not federal mandates, drives improvement. However, Trump's vision comes with inherent risks. While tax cuts provided immediate relief for some, critics argue that they disproportionately benefited the wealthiest Americans and corporations, contributing to long-term income inequality. His America First agenda, while resonating with those seeking stronger borders and economic nationalism, may alienate the U.S. from crucial international cooperation and alliances, potentially affecting global stability and America's standing on the world stage. Judicial influence and social policy. A major cornerstone of Trump's legacy is his reshaping of the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal judiciary. Through the appointment of 3 conservative justices, Trump has redefined the legal landscape of the United States for a generation, with landmark decisions like the repeal of Roe v. Wade shifting significant powers back to individual states. For many conservative voters, this judicial legacy is a triumph, representing a return to traditional values and state sovereignty. For others, it is a direct threat to individual freedoms, particularly regarding reproductive rights and healthcare access. Kamala Harris represents the opposite side of this judicial shift, advocating for federal protections to ensure that rights, such as access to abortion and voting, are safeguarded regardless of state-level decisions. Her judicial philosophy is grounded in expanding civil liberties and defending the rights of marginalized communities. Harris's vision calls for national standards that prevent states from rolling back hard-earned social justice reforms. Yet, this approach may be seen as an overreach by those who favor states' rights and a limited federal role. Foreign policy and global leadership. In the realm of foreign policy, the candidates once again represent contrasting philosophies. Kamala Harris advocates for multilateralism, emphasizing the importance of alliances, diplomacy, and collective action on global challenges like climate change. Her commitment to re-engaging with international organizations like NATO and the Paris Climate Accord highlights her belief in global cooperation as a path to sustainable progress. Harris seeks to position the U.S. as a leader in tackling the most pressing issues of our time, particularly in the areas of human rights and environmental justice. Conversely, Donald Trump's America First doctrine prioritizes national sovereignty, direct bilateral negotiations, and economic nationalism. His withdrawal from multilateral agreements and focus on tariff-driven trade underscore his belief that America should not be constrained by global obligations. Trump's foreign policy, marked by assertive and at times confrontational rhetoric, resonates with voters who want the U.S. to regain control over its borders and economy. However, critics argue that this approach could lead to isolationism and diminished global influence in an increasingly interconnected world. Successes, failures, and controversies. Kamala Harris's career is a story of breaking barriers and achieving significant policy victories, such as the $25 billion mortgage settlement for California homeowners and her work on criminal justice reform. Yet her past as a prosecutor has not been without controversy, as some argue she was too cautious on issues like police misconduct and prison reform. Her relatively low profile as vice president has also raised questions about her leadership style and preparedness for higher office, a narrative she will need to challenge in the 2024 election. Donald Trump's presidency was marked by both unprecedented achievements and deep controversies. His success in appointing conservative justices to the Supreme Court and his economic deregulation efforts were major victories for his supporters. However, Trump's presidency was also defined by two impeachments, the Russia investigation and widespread criticism of his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. These controversies have cemented his place as a polarizing figure, beloved by his base for his boldness and loathed by his critics for his divisive rhetoric. Final thoughts. The 2024 election offers voters a profound choice between two distinct visions for America's future. Kamala Harris offers a progressive agenda focused on equity, social justice, and collective action, while Donald Trump presents a vision of economic freedom, deregulation, and national sovereignty. Each candidate's approach reflects their deeply held beliefs about the role of government and America's place in the world. For undecided voters, this decision is not merely about policy, but about the kind of leadership and values that will shape the country for generations to come. The future of the nation, its economy, its place on the world stage, and its core values will be determined by the path chosen in this election. Which vision aligns more with your hopes for America's future? The answer lies in understanding how each candidate's policies, values, and leadership style will impact you, your family, and the country at large. As the author of this book, I feel compelled to offer a final personal reflection. While I have aimed to present a balanced and factual comparison of both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's platforms, I believe it's important to address an overarching concern that deeply influences my own view on this election. Specifically, I disagree with an isolationist approach in U.S. foreign and domestic policy. The idea of retreating from global engagement, rejecting long-standing alliances, and turning inward is, in my view, detrimental to America's long-term interests, both economically and morally. Furthermore, much of the nationalist rhetoric that has emerged in recent years, including certain sentiments expressed by Donald Trump and his political allies, has at times echoed themes from troubling moments in world history. While I do not make direct comparisons lightly, the emphasis on division, scapegoating minorities, and the promotion of a singular national identity over inclusivity raises alarm bells for me. Such language and policies risk taking us down a path that we have seen before, one that history warns us to tread carefully. In the end, while this book seeks to provide voters with a clear view of the policies and personalities of both candidates, I personally believe in an America that is engaged with the world, values diversity, and avoids the dangers of extreme nationalism. It is this perspective that I encourage readers to consider as they make their choice in the upcoming election.